Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing great today, Tim. We have two guests on the show today. One of them is a return guest. We had her on many, many months ago to promote the great podcast that she's a part of and the great travel book that she wrote with her partner. And this time, her partner is joining the conversation, which is a delight because it just opens up the door for more humor, more interesting chatter. But Tim, I want to open the door up to your mood. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for asking. And yes, on this episode here today, we have the authors of the new book, A Haunted Road Atlas Next Stop. And it's Christine Schiefer and M. Schulz from the hit podcast, And That's Why We Drink. And this is a sequel book, Lance. They released one before, and as we discuss in the episode, it was a New York Times bestseller, and they had to write another one. And it is really also another fantastic book, and it's full of really interesting stories, some creepy, some spooky. It really runs the gambit.
It really does, and you're holding up the book there. And when we have authors on the show talking about their books, they typically send us either a hard copy or an e-copy of the book. Huge shout out to the publishing company Andrews McMeel for sending us not only the book, but all of the little trinkets that came along with it, including pencils and this Ouija board planchette pin, which is amazing. Definitely go and pick this one up. We say it in the episode. Tim and I are jealous. We're super jealous because this is it's a book that anyone in this field wants to be a part of. They want to contribute to and have the opportunity to write. You're going to haunted locations and you're getting the skinny on what went down there. Big congrats to Christine and M for completing their second book.
Yes, very cool. Okay, so make sure to check it out. There's a link in the show notes, and check out their podcast, And That's Why We Drink. And follow us on social media while you're out there. It's Crawlspace Podcast or Crawlspace Pod. And we're going to take a quick break here for commercial, and we'll be right back with Christine and M. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. Christine and M of And That's Why We Drink. How are you today?
We're just spellbound and delighted to be here, right, Em?
Oh, well, I can't say it better than that. So spellbound also. Thank you.
That's, I think 90% of the people that join the show say that they're spellbound. So you're in good company.
Something about you, something about you. Very spellbinding.
It's a great word. It should be brought back a little bit. So we're reclaiming it through you.
Oh my goodness. Let's do this for 2 minutes. What some words here that need to be reclaimed into the popular lexicon.
Don't test us. We probably have 1,000, so.
Yeah. You know what word should not come back? Pumpernickel. Yuck.
That went away?
Did it go anywhere?
I've never heard anyone ever once use that in an actual sentence. Have you?
I've heard you say it actually multiple times, Em. So I think maybe you're the last remaining person on Earth using it.
Maybe I'm like the last Jedi of pumpernickel.
Maybe look in the mirror.
How is someone going to order a sandwich if they want pumpernickel bread?
Well, that's a them problem. You know what I mean?
Do you know anyone who does order with pumpernickel bread?
I mean, my dad does, but he's 75, so I don't know if that counts.
Right. What, a Reuben, right? Isn't
that's
a Reuben?
Rye.
That's rye. Okay. Well, you can do a marble rye.
Yeah.
Right?
That's as far as I'll go, to be honest. I'll do marble. I won't go full pumpernickel.
Don't push it.
But what if rye is not available?
Well, then I
sourdough?
Yeah, just end it there. If rye isn't available, just sits over.
End it.
Try something else. Try something else,
Christine, I have literally been waiting ever since we had our last conversation to ask you this question. The last time we spoke, were you wearing a rainbow kitten surprise shirt?
I was. Wow.
I was watching the footage back and I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yes,
she's in a Rainbow Kitten Surprise.
Favorite bands of all time. I actually once M brought it up on the podcast, and their manager, their tour manager, reached out to me via DM and said, "Oh, I listened to it, and that's why we drink. Like, you can come meet the band." And I met them, and they got signed stuff for me. It was like one of those. I was like, I've peaked. I think so. Yeah, they're
amazing.
I'm a huge fan. Yeah,
it's amazing. I had gone to a cookout at a friend's house like a month before that, or it was recent. Like it was right before that. I'd never heard of the band. And one of these like mutual friends that we had came up to me and I was talking. I said, "So what have you been up to?" And he's like, "Honestly, I've just been listening to a lot of Rainbow Kitten Surprise." And I was like, "What sentence did you just say to me?"
Yeah, that doesn't sound right. Yeah.
I had no idea. And he was like, "On the way home, listen to this band." And I did, and I got hooked instantly.
Oh,
and then,
it's a great band. Yeah. And they're on tour right now, but they're not coming to Cincinnati. Womp womp. So, if they're coming
I gotta look
to
this
you.
up.
Yeah.
But how you two doing? Christine and Em together. Em, you weren't part of the conversation last time. You were a part in spirit.
Oh,
part of
thank
the
you.
conversation.
Yeah.
Em's always lingering around me in spirit. It's the most annoying thing.
I have some pretty good feelers out when I can tell when people are talking about me. And I can tell you I had a great time. I appreciate everything you said. And also I did nod when you were asking if Christine wore a Rainbow Kitten Surprise shirt during that conversation, even though I wasn't there. But I'm telling you, she wears that shirt all the time. So it was a confident yes for
you can
me.
vouch for, you can vouch for me. Yeah.
Great.
No, happy to be part of the conversation today. But I've never actually listened to Rainbow Kitten Surprise unless Christine tells me to. So
Yeah, I got to check this out. I don't know. It's a
good
great
band.
combination of words. Yeah, it sounded like a kid's show. That's why I thought you were asking about it first. But
That's also relatable. Yes.
yeah.
I think the only reason I know them so well is because we kind of toured the same cities with
and
them.
also when we were on tour, that was so true. Every time we got there, they were like, "We hosted Rainbow Kitten Surprise last night," and I was always like, "I just missed them." So
it was
felt
like we
were stalking them around the country.
It's
for a
like we
while.
were groupies trying to chase them by doing our own show right after them.
Like
It was
being
very
so
weird.
bad at doing it. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, what's new with you two in the podcast landscape? What's going on with the podcast?
We're about to hit our 400th episode, as Em keeps reminding me, and I keep saying, okay, and Em says, no, we have to do something extravagant and huge, and I don't quite know. I'm a little scared of what that might mean. But
well, I know that it's coming up really soon, and so I've also told Christine that we can probably hold off on the 400th, but the 500th has to be something big.
the 500th, I can live with that. Yes, 500 we can do a big bonanza for everybody. But I guess what we're supposed to be saying is new is that we wrote another book, and I can promise you somewhere our publishers are like, oh my god, nobody cares about the 400th episode. Talk about the book. But yeah, we did write another book, so that's coming out this month, September, coming right up.
Mhm.
And
It's,
we're really amped.
It's called A Haunted Road Atlas Next Stop.
Oh,
yes.
okay, yes, a copy.
And, it was our first book was A Haunted Road Atlas, so this is just more cities for us to yap about for all of you to read. But it's a haunted, spooky travel guide. So anywhere you're going, if it's a major city, we've probably covered it in one of the books, and it comes with recommendations for ghost tours and bar recommendations and haunted hotels. And we also highlight a true crime and a paranormal story from that city, and it's a good time.
Yeah, it is a really good time. And you've gone and done it again, because after we spoke the first time, Tim and I were like, we're so jealous that they wrote this book that's like a dream scenario for people. Like Tim and I would have loved to. I mean, we could still go to these places and write about them, but this is
we'll sue you if you do that, though. You know that, right?
That's yeah.
I have no idea how to sue a person, so don't worry.
We can help you with that.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
You could be our first victims, and we'll be really shoddy at it. So
Yeah,
maybe you'll win,
we'll give you some pointers along the way and be like, hey guys, we still own some property,
and we'll believe you.
Yeah. So we were super jealous, loved the book, and then you went and did it again.
Oops. Yeah, we should have given you a turn. I'm sorry, but we were kind of the first book, and I really am not trying to say this as a brag because it's still shocking to me, but the first one was a New York Times bestseller, and when our manager called and did the obligatory congratulations, she first of all said, I'm really shocked about this. And I said, wow, that makes two of us, I guess. And then 3, she said, she was like, you do know the bad news means you now have to write another one, right? And we were like, no, we just wrote the first one. And so like pretty quickly our manager was like, sorry, you're now authors, quote unquote. So we did it again. And it was still a lot of work, but I think we've talked about this. I think we're even, I know it's a sequel, but we're kind of even prouder of this one. It feels like we kind of got the hang of how to try to translate podcast banter into a book, which is harder than it seems. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, tell us a little bit about the process you took to write this. Did you travel to all of these places How did it all come together?
We didn't get to travel to all these places, so some of them we just had to do a lot of research on. But, you know, the goal is to eventually get to all these places. But there was like Billings, Montana, where the hope was that we would at least be going there on tour. I'm open to it, but we would go.
No, I literally had the book open to that page.
Okay.
Em, are you open to going to Billings, Montana?
I was like, I am open to Montana.
Yeah, you were like, geez, calm down.
I thought I missed like a face someone made, and I was like, relax, like I'm not hating on Montana, but like we thought we would end up at all these places, or if we could, if we were near the area, maybe get to go there ourselves before we wrote about it.
Yeah, it's selfish in a way, because when we go to Billings, Montana very soon, which apparently we're going to do now for tour, we already have like a little to-do list already published. Yeah,
we're hoping we could go to all the places, but unfortunately we didn't get to all of them. The main priority was that we were doing pretty equal coverage of the country and trying to make sure that every region got some play. And so even if we hadn't gone somewhere, we wanted to make sure that it was covered. So those required a little more research. Some we have been to a million times, and so it was really easy to write about. But the main process took probably like, I think 3 months of writing. I think that was the real meat of it. And this is where the publishers wish they could duct tape my mouth, because I say that the process for me, I think it was different for Christine, but the process for me was pretty awful because I actually hate writing. And I openly don't read a lot of books. I listen to audiobooks, but I don't actually read dry text. And so when it was brought to us that we should write a book, I had to have a conversation with Christine about, like, it feels really disingenuous to write a book when I so openly talk about how this is not my hobby.
I was like, can we please write a damn book? And I was like, I mean, no. I was like, okay, this is going to be a conversation.
Let alone 2. I was like, that's not happening for sure. But I think because one of my things is I have incredibly awful ADHD. I can't focus on anything for more than like a couple minutes. And that's one of the reasons why I can't read a lot of dry text. I just get bored quickly. So I told Christine, if we're going to do this, everything has to be bite-sized. It has to be something that's going to keep people's attention. A lot of pictures. Like, I was like, it's got to be really fun looking. Otherwise, I wouldn't open my own book.
I mean, I had zero problem with that too. So it
actually did help in the writing process a little bit, because then you only had so many words you had to write. But anyway, so the process for me was different, where I was trying to find ways to make it more fun, and that was my focus, versus the writing process. That was the part I was looking the least forward to. And I think Christine, on the other hand, was really stoked about writing something.
Yeah, I was happy you were handling the research part. That's kind of my least favorite, even though I guess maybe it's just because, like, of all the true crime, it's so, you know, there's heavy. Of course you guys know that there's such a bar, you know, journalistically, like, you got to be very careful and what sources you pick, that kind of thing. And like telling a story accurately, especially in print. And so, yeah, there's a lot of pressure there. So then when Em was like, oh, how about I just do like the fun little listicles and fun facts? I was like, please, just you do the research. I'll just focus on the actual writing part. But I think, I mean, we had a similar process in that we cried and complained throughout most of it. But I do like to write more than Em does. But I don't like to do it when I have to do it. You know what I mean?
It felt like school again. It was like, what do you mean a deadline?
Like yeah. But no. So it did feel like a gigantic group project, but in the best way, you know, with your best friend. So it wasn't quite as bad. But I will say also, we have been to quite a few of these towns, but the reason we haven't been to a lot of them is the first book we actually wrote during COVID, and it was more of like an aspirational travel guide, because we had canceled our whole tour and we thought to ourselves, well, let's talk about a lot of the places we have been to and, like, you know, what we miss about them and what, you know, we wish we could go out and do. And then hopefully, you know, by the time a year or two this book actually comes out, people can start, you know, taking it on the road and traveling. And so it kind of worked out strangely that way, like, who writes a travel guide during COVID? But it was sort of like a memento of our old tours, and then like a hope that we could, you know, get back to some of those places in the future. And then we tried to put like 40 cities in the first book, and they were like, that's a 6,000 page book, that's not happening.
It was actually like hundreds of cities. When I first thought we were going to do like a travel guide, I thought it was like, oh, we're hitting every town, and
it's like an atlas.
yeah, like a true encyclopedia. And I still really want to do that. If only I didn't have to write it. I just want to conjure it.
You want to do it to an extent.
Yeah, and our publishers were like, you realize that's thousands of pages. It's impossible. Don't do that. So they limited us to 30-something cities. So that's kind of the same amount that we put in this time.
Yeah, so when it came to the second one, we were like, oh, good. We have hundreds of options still that we have yet to cover. So honestly, don't tell our manager because she'll probably be like, okay, why don't you write 15 of them? I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that.
Stop listening now if you're listening, manager.
I don't want to give her
listen right up to the ad break.
Yeah.
Past the ad break.
How much time does it take away from the podcast? Like, how do you manage the writing of it and still producing episodes and all that?
That's a good question.
I mean, I think I just by nature of having a child and 3 pets and another full-time podcast have like a much more annoying schedule when it comes to like actually planning out our recordings. So I think I limit it so much already that like, I don't know, Em just kind of is very gracious and kind of just goes along with my crazy schedule. So, yeah, I don't know what it was like for you, Em. I mean, for me, writing the book was kind of like a nighttime process. I don't know. Or I guess the research probably was, but then I was able to like, it was actually kind of nice to have like a routine where I was like, because sometimes I say, oh, I'm going upstairs to podcast. And then my husband will hear me just like up here, like cackling and like talking about ghosts. And it maybe doesn't sound as much like work, but I was like, I have to write 3 chapters today. Like I'm going to my study, and I like locked myself away. And so I think with the book, I was like much stricter about like, everybody leave me alone. This is my writing day. Get out of the house, And so I got to kind of really pretend to be like that real, old timey author with my own little study and
my
tea.
inspiration. It's just struck. We have to leave. Yeah.
Yeah. The muse has arrived. Get out of the house. So that's kind of what I did. I was really intentional about a structure, which quite frankly, I probably should be about podcasting since it's our job. But, we wing it.
Yeah. Because so Christine and I also outside of the podcast are best friends. As far as I know, I don't know what she's told you when I wasn't here.
You heard me say I wrote a book with my best friend like 2 minutes ago. Okay, is that not enough?
Well, I feel like our because when it's just the 2 of us and there's not a whole publishing team behind us waiting on a deadline, we're able to obviously be much more flexible. I think this really put like an extra level of fear on me of like, oh, other people who I can't like laugh this off with could be mad. So I have to get this done.
We don't have to like go to our podcast listeners and be like, oops, we messed up. Like we have to go to actual publishers who are paying us money. And Maggie, our manager, is truly very scary. So we do when there is like a real deadline, we will step in line.
Yeah. The last thing you want to do is make her mad. So I'm very motivated by fear. So that worked out pretty well.
That worked out great.
So Maggie, if you're listening, you know what buttons to push. And
Well, hopefully she's not listening anymore because we told her not to.
We told her
we did already. Yeah, stop it, Maggie.
Oh, it was the same person. Gotcha.
Yeah, but we didn't address her by name. So,
that's right.
Hopefully she's not insulted too. And
No,
mad at me now.
Yeah,
Oh,
she's.
I think she knows.
No.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
Now, you two have this really unique, I guess, element of the book that features little chime-ins with both of you, like little caricatures and these comments throughout, and it is really, really relatable to listening to the podcast because you feel like you are reading the podcast version of what the audio is. You know what I mean? Like,
phew. Okay, that's great because that's what we were trying to do, but we weren't sure if it would translate.
Yeah, it totally translates because you're looking at it and you're like, oh, they're contributing in that like quirky way.
Oh, they're interrupting once again. That sounds right.
Well, we can't just let the other one tell a fucking story.
Nope.
Yeah,
I can't just read this paragraph.
Nope. Yeah, even the readers aren't allowed. Yeah.
But no, it was who came up with that because it's a really unique way to incorporate the idea of the podcast into, like you said, dry text.
That's a really good question. I know, and maybe you know more detail, but I do remember like debating different formats. We were saying maybe we do kind of like colon, like so-and-so speaking, like a script wise, but that just didn't seem right formatting.
Yeah, we had, I think some of our very first meetings we had with a publisher on the first book were, how do we make this feel like a podcast?
That was the biggest obstacle.
I think that also stemmed from my whole crisis of if we write just a plain book, it's not going to feel genuine. It's not going to feel sincere for me. It has to feel like something that we would do, and we really like interrupting each other. So maybe that's how we just keep going with this. I remember that being an early conversation, and I think it was our publisher Charlie who suggested the little avatar with the blurb inside. But we knew we wanted it to feel conversational, because if we wanted it to stem from our podcast, it had to feel like the podcast. So
yeah, that's one of my proudest parts of it. But I will say, and I think the second book, we actually did a better job at that, because with the first book, I think we were still trying to figure out how that would come. We did have blurbs, but it didn't feel quite as conversational. I think the second book, we were more intentional about having a little more back and forth.
Well, also we were worried, I think. Yes, I think the first one, we were maybe more paranoid about how it came off, because we were doing this for the first time. There weren't really, I don't think, a lot of references before us that had ever really done that. And so I think we were so worried about, does it even sound like a joke when it's written down versus our inflection saying it to
right.
you?
Yeah.
And so I feel like most of our jokes don't land unless it's a sarcastic comment on the fly. And we were like, does that even translate? So I think we got in our heads really easily about is this funny? Do I need to punch this up? And on the second book, we were just whatever, we're just gonna
whatever, we can do what we want.
Yeah
it felt more natural. I think also, having done the first one, we were okay, yeah, that actually kind of works. And I will say the worst part of that, though, is when you go record the audiobook, because we do them separately, because we're located in different cities. And so I would go into the studio and they'd say, okay, and here's your line, and it would be eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And I was like, what? What am I saying? And they were
and she has to trust that I said it in the right inflection.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell I was even responding to. So I was like, am I singing? Am I making a joke? I mean, there's so many dumb comments. One of them really literally was the cha-cha slide. And I was like, what could I possibly have been interrupting M for that required this sentence? So I'm sure listening to the audiobook is probably a very weird experience, where they're trying to weave together,
make it sound like we were there.
Yeah, it's super weird. So I don't know how that's going to work, but I will say it was very torturous to film in front of strangers.
Very cool. Well, I'm sure it comes together really well. But yeah, that's an interesting way to do an audiobook too.
It's definitely
very
unique.
Cool.
Yeah.
It felt a lot like doing improv comedy for
By
one
yourself.
person who's the editor of the audiobook, and he hasn't actually heard the lead up to the joke.
Yeah.
So he just hears me saying a punchline that is not funny out of context, and he just dead stares at you while he clicks around. And I'm like, okay, I promise it's actually funny.
It better be.
It really gets in your head when you have to just read only the end of a joke and nobody laughs. So
we get a lot of books sent our way, and most of them are the true crime books, the ones that, I interviewed a serial killer and it screwed me up for life. And,
right.
Just those heavy ones. And
the classics. Yeah.
The classics. Yeah. My significant other will get a package in the mail and she'll be like, I think you got another book. So she doesn't usually read those.
my new thing from Amazon. No,
it's another murder book.
Too bad.
Another thing to bum you out.
Yeah. So I opened up this one, and she was like, what is this? And I showed her, and I was like, it's a sequel to, we did this a while ago. And they wrote the first book and we interviewed them, and, this is the sequel. So she loved it. And
yay!
Yeah. And what's funny is she was reading it, I don't know, a couple nights ago, and she had a glass of wine. And then when I picked it up again, I saw your little wine rings that are on there. And I'm like, what? She left wine ring?
That's not a
She's
coaster.
not usually that messy. And then I realized it's part
it's a
of the
placeholder.
book.
It's we do it so when you do it, eventually you don't feel bad.
Thank you.
Start the process.
That really was intentional. I was like, see, and that way, if you do spill wine, you don't have to feel bad. It just blends
It just
right
fits in.
Yeah, I did it first, so nobody has to feel bad. So yeah, if she wants to use it as a coaster, tell her go right ahead. That's what it's made for.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, the book's made for it to be a coaster.
Yeah. Well, it's multi-purpose.
Yeah, it's versatile.
Very versatile.
Very cool. Well, tell us about some of these mysteries. Let's start with the paranormal here. I see that you've written about the Winchester Mystery House. What can you tell us about this?
Oh, Em, what can you tell us about this?
Well, I did promise our listeners I would stop talking about the Winchester Mystery House because it was our very first episode. And I think for our 100th or 200th episode, I ended up revisiting it, and then we did something else there. It became like a thing where like
we basically got like obsessed with the Winchester Mystery House.
Nobody who has listened to our podcast ever needs to hear any new information about it. But so it's this house. Sarah Winchester was a woman back in the 1880s where she married into the Winchester family, and they were the founders or owners of the Winchester rifle. And there was a weird thing where her father-in-law and her husband and someone else in the family all died at the same time. She ended up inheriting all of their money. And she was it was like she's making thousands just by sitting and breathing every single day. And she just had all this money in the world, but she couldn't deal with the fact that all of these
she also her baby passed away right after
her baby passed away. That's what it was.
After her husband did, and it like really sent her into a tailspin.
Yeah, and so she was desperately looking for ways to reach out to her baby. I know she was into spiritualism, and eventually she talked to a medium who said that she was being cursed by all the people who had died from the Winchester rifles during the war. And the way that she had to appease these ghosts so that people would stop dying is she had to continually be building a house to either let them live in. I don't totally know the reason why she had to keep building the house.
I think the psychic's family was in construction.
Oh, but
they were bricklayers. Yeah, in San Jose, which is where the house is located. Because the psychic was in Boston, so he was probably like, "Oh, and why don't you also just head on over to California while you're at it?" And
they said move away, find a house, and just keep building. And if you ever stop building, then you'll die.
Then the ghosts will get you, or you won't appease the ghosts. Like it's kind of still unclear. We've done tours there, and they say it's still kind of unclear. I mean, a lot of theories say she was just so mentally, struggling with all of this that she had a nervous breakdown, or she just wanted to live a quirky, eccentric life, and that's about it. But she seems like a really cool lady.
Yeah, and she had all this money that she was able to continually build, and she had people around the clock. There was always someone nailing something into a roof or a wall, even like when she was sleeping at night. She had around the clock service for, I think, decades. And because she had to keep giving them work, she just started coming up with the craziest things to tell them to do. Like, build stairs that lead to nothing. Put a door on the side of the wall on the third floor. Put
a stained glass window and then build a wall in front of it so you can't even see it.
Make a dresser that goes from one end of the house all the way to the other end, and you can walk through the entire thing. Give me a seance room. And so it became this really crazy house with like 6 kitchens and
like a fun house.
40 bedrooms, 20 living rooms, and then like only 1 shower, which was crazy.
She was also obsessed with the number 13. So there are a lot of 13s throughout the house. 13 steps at every
13 hooks, 13
stairwell.
Candles, 13 tiles on every ceiling. Yeah. So it just ended up becoming this place that, because ghosts were involved in the story, it naturally turned into a haunted house story.
She did hold quite a lot of seances in her thusly labeled seance room, and to this day nobody really knows what she did in there because it was like completely private and walled off. They would like ring a special bell when she went into the seance room, so nobody really knows what she was up to in there. But yeah, she also had a lot of builders who brought their families and lived on the property in like little separate cabins, and so a lot of people think some of them are ghosts on the property as well, and that of course she hangs around, or actually they said they think she like pops by every now and then just to check in and see what's going on. But yeah, that's one of my favorites. That's a classic, and that's where we drink tale.
It's perfect for us because it's kind of like a what the story. Like it's just so out of nowhere, and it looks really cool. You can go visit it, and it's like it's its own experience. And then you can and then it's also a ghost story. It's like the perfect
it's
like
a
trifecta. Yeah.
Yeah. Quite the feat of architecture, I will say.
Yeah.
Are there stories of like actual like sightings of apparitions or things like that in the house?
Yeah. Actually, one of the more famous ones is of a maintenance worker that was that used to be around the clock there and used to work around the clock there. And people still, especially when they're doing renovations, they'll see a man walking around in white coveralls with a wheelbarrow. And they're like, oh, I don't remember hiring that guy, but I guess we have a lot of, people on site today. So maybe we just hired him and I just don't remember him. but people would see him everywhere, just helping out. Which, like, you can stop now. It's your time's passed.
It's time for a break. Yeah,
yeah. Take your
O'Shed
5.
exists now. Don't worry.
Yeah, and but so a bunch of people were like, "Who the hell is this guy? Like, he's not talking to any of us. He's just silently working." And when they got down to the basement, they found an old framed picture of like an original construction workers, and he was in the picture. And so now they've hung his picture up, and if they ever see him, they say hi. But people say that there's ghosts all throughout the house. I don't know about like the hearing footsteps. I think that's just an old house with a lot of architecture to it. Could be just a bunch
like
of creaks.
so many steps that
and so many steps. But one of the theories was that Sarah Winchester was building the house as crazy as she was because she was trying to confuse the ghosts so that they could never get to her. So the theory is that the ghosts are still running around and they're trying to find their way out. So
that doesn't sound crazy. That sounds well planned. That sounds meticulous. If ghosts were coming to me, like coming for me,
yeah,
and I had the money to build a house like that, yeah.
She's all about a strategy, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. She loves an agenda.
But what made her think it would work?
I mean, she lived pretty long, so I guess every day she was alive, she was like, I guess I'm doing it right because I'm still here.
She got to try something.
It either did work or it didn't work.
It was just confirmation bias the entire time.
It probably was. Yeah.
Well, I feel like we had this really cool moment with Billings, Montana, which was hilarious, and I had the book open to that. Can you tell us about Billings, Montana? What's there? And then, if you want, I can share a story that didn't happen to me, but a friend of mine in Billings,
no way!
Billings, Montana. Yeah, you haven't been there yet?
I have not been to.
I haven't
been to Billings.
Okay.
I do really want to though, and that's the other thing about doing this book is that like as you're researching it, you're like, man, I'm looking up all the coolest stuff in these towns, and I can't even go yet. I left my book downstairs because I was showing it off to my 3-year-old, and she was not impressed. So I don't have it with me right now. But so okay, the Little Miss Murder. Yeah, so I'd never been to Billings, and as we were researching it. Em and I both struggled with Billings just because it's a much smaller town than, say, in the first book we covered Los Angeles and New York City and Chicago, and so for this book we had a lot of smaller towns. So for Billings, it's hard sometimes to find like kind of a story that fits the length that we were looking for the book.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't really necessarily cover like a Jeffrey Dahmer because it's just not going to be able to be condensed down so much. But then a lot of the like very short stories are pretty much just like tragic bylines in the newspaper that don't have much, content to research. So the Little Miss Murder I found, and it actually took place on the way to Billings, but she was from Billings, Montana, and that's why I ended up picking that case. This young woman, Lisa Marie Kimmel was her name, and she was driving home to her family in Billings and just up and vanished, but not just her car vanished as well. And so after a while of searching and like desperately looking for her or of course her car, because that would be a great clue, they ended up finding her remains, and she had been murdered. And her family went on this campaign to figure out who it was. There were a lot of bizarre happenstances. Like I guess one of the detectives working the case got way obsessed to the point that the family was uncomfortable with it, and he would visit the grave more often than her own family, and he ended up having to like be removed from the case. So there were a lot of just like strange kind of twists and turns, and eventually they were able to arrest the guy. And well, it's just horrible, but they essentially arrested the guy, and when they were trying to find the car, he wouldn't tell them. And his neighbor said, hey, this really weird thing happened. He got a backhoe out here one day and dug a giant hole in the ground. And he had buried her car underground. And that's why they hadn't been able to, find it. And who knows how long it would have been there if somebody hadn't, spoken up. But just very strange. And the reason it's called the Little Miss Murder is that she had a red car, and the vanity plate said Lil Miss because her grandmother had given her that nickname. And so it was just extra strange to everybody that they weren't able to find a red car that said Lil Miss. Like it was, one of them, which is maybe why he buried the evidence, I suppose, because it was such an obvious, bright red car. But yeah, that's the case. It's pretty sad, and it's one that I hadn't really known about before researching it. but I watched a few documentaries, and at the end, there is kind of like this full circle, or like this comeuppance moment for her family, because they actually go to the house of the man who murdered her and burn it down. And legally,
That's amazing.
They're allowed to. Sorry, I don't. Everyone's like, no, they it was a controlled burn, but she was able to kind of light the match and, in a very symbolic way, get some closure. So yeah, that's the Billings case.
For something like this, well, first I just want to point out that M's comment here says, I would literally rather just go to jail than have to dig a hole that large, which I thought was funny.
Yeah, that and I
stand by that, actually.
Yeah, quite frankly, that I'm surprised M didn't say that as I was talking just now. Yeah.
I was trying my best to be professional, but I did think something along the lines of that. So
yeah, like halfway through digging that hole, the guy was probably like, is this worth it?
Like,
I'd be like,
come
never
on.
mind. Like, it's probably air conditioned in prison. It's okay.
Yeah. But for something like this, if you're traveling to these locations, would you go to that site where the house burned down, and would you kind of walk around and talk about it, or would you go to more like locally owned establishments, or both?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I think I definitely wouldn't go to the spot, where she was from or where her family lived, obviously, or anything like that. And the reason I don't, sometimes I will put an address in the book if it's relevant to the case, but only if it's, a museum or like publicly accessible, because even though it's like a serial killer's house, I'm not going to like put the coordinates and have people lead people there. But because who knows who lives there now, I don't know. But yeah, if I had the intel, I might go to that spot. I think I maybe would be more likely to visit her gravesite, because I know people go there to pay their respects, and her gravestone also says Lil Miss on it. It's kind of like a beautiful tribute. So I'd probably do something like that. But yeah, as far as when we're traveling, especially, it's already such a stressful time usually for tour that I try to focus on happy things before the show. So I think if I had an extra day, maybe I would do a little stop like that, which is a really nice thought. But if Em and I are in Montana for 12 hours, I might not be able to pull it off. We'll see.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I go to cemeteries and sites of this stuff all the time when we're on tour. I literally went to Sarah Winchester's gravesite. So, which was very
maybe
cool.
Em would take me. I think probably I would just be like, Em, you take me there.
Yeah, I'm very into going to all the spots. So, I just tell Christina about it later.
Yeah, I live vicariously while I'm in a plush bathrobe and ordering room service. So,
and I just
travel differently.
And I just come from a big rainy cemetery, and I'm like, I saw it. It was okay.
That sounds right.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Well, what was your favorite case or area to write about in this book?
Well, it wasn't Boise. Em and I texted about Boise so often. We were like, I can't figure out what case to cover. It was we were struggling with Boise just because it's so small. But I ended up kind of loving it for that reason. But it's kind of a love-hate relationship I have with Boise now.
Yeah, it definitely made writing harder. I think I covered this in the Austin chapter, but it was the Minnesota Iceman. Which you would think Minnesota, but he is currently being preserved at the Museum of Weird in Austin, Texas. But it was a cryptid that was at some point in Minnesota, and I always thought he was such a weird case. Didn't
Jimmy Stewart own him for a minute?
There's a running theory that the actor Jimmy Stewart at one point owned the cryptid and just never told anybody, and then silently sold him.
It's like the strangest story, I'm telling you.
Like Jimmy Stewart from like the 30s and 40s?
Yes, like it's very, very odd.
You know how back then people could kind of just go to a foreign country and just like, what do you call it, pillage, like take stuff for themselves and take it home, and like
brought home a 7-foot monster.
Yeah, he just like found it and was like, cool, that's mine now, I guess. It's just so strange, all this stuff.
I wish I could do a Jimmy Stewart impersonation so I could be like,
me too.
I whatever you do, I would probably believe you and be like, that's really good, because I don't know well enough.
Jimmy Stewart.
Some transatlantic Minnesota Iceman. No, but I always thought that one was really interesting. And the full circle to it is that, so he was this cryptid that somebody found. It's still kind of unheard of how it ended up passing hands to get to the main guy who was in charge of the Minnesota Iceman. But he would take it on tour and travel around with it. And a long time ago, there was this little kid who remembers going to a fair and like seeing this roadside attraction and looking at this cryptid. And he was so blown away by it that it made him just become so fascinated with cryptids that he ended up opening the Museum of Weird and now owns the Minnesota Iceman. So it's a very sweet full circle.
Wow, I always forget about that part.
But I've seen the Minnesota Iceman myself because I go to all these weird places. And my favorite part of the story is that it's not like necessarily funny, but it's a good plot twist. Is that at one point the original owner almost got arrested for. Like they had to do tests on this thing to make sure it wasn't a person, because otherwise he was traveling around with a corpse and like crossing state
even
lines.
In the 30s was a little bit frowned upon.
Yeah, it was like he was just he was walking around with his dead body as if it was a roadside attraction. And so there was like legal issues at the same time. The Smithsonian got involved to do testing. So it's just like a really wild story from beginning to end.
You know what I love about your books, and this is going to end up turning into like one of those series as well. You said that you're probably going to have to do a third one now, and that's a wonderful gift to folks like us. But I feel like this is going to turn into those the series like the Weird Rhode Island Weird,
yes.
Like,
we love those,
thank you.
But I love them too, but yours, this is so much better, and I'm not trying to like
nice.
kiss up here, or I'm not saying that those weird ones are not good, because they are. Like for people who do podcasting and we're into this sort of thing, like it's really cool to read it the way it's laid out. And,
thank you.
Yeah. So
that means a lot, really. Thanks.
I can't wait for like you to come back on the show, both of you to come back on the show and be like, and then our publisher said we needed to do a 16th book.
And now we're on like Australia.
Yeah.
The road guide to Australia.
A haunted universe atlas.
Yeah.
Different
SpaceX
planets.
mission. Yeah. Well, that's a high compliment. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But yeah, that's a high compliment. So thank you for the praise. I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. And perhaps we'll all see each other at the Rainbow Kitten Surprise Show in Portland, Maine on the 17th of September.
Oh, man. We're probably
just
on
looked it
Twitter
up.
that day, aren't we? September?
You're going to have to cancel.
I think Christine would leave her own show to go see another concert of Rainbow Kitten Surprise.
That's
So
fine.
you might be onto something.
I'll make it work.
All right. Well, we'll circle back.
And I'll be there after the show. You can fill in for me.
I'll handle it. It's fine.
Tim can step in.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'll do my Jimmy Stewart impression as I
That's all you
give it
need.
to us one more time. I haven't heard that one in a while.
Thanks, Christine and Em, for hanging out with us today. Sorry. Not really.
Do not
Beautiful.
apologize.
Beautiful.
That was really good. Wow. I got to remember that.
Well, thank you so
Jimmy,
much for
take us out.
hanging out with us today. This has been a fun chat, and we look forward to your sequel book hitting the bestsellers list again. So congratulations on the new book, and we wish you the best of luck.
Well, thank you so much for having us. This was great.